Hey young friends, Dr. Bill here. As always, I am so glad that you've chosen to spend a little time with me as we continue to talk about big names in the Bible. Today we're going to talk about the prophet Joel. Now the book that bears his name is very short. In fact, it's one of the shortest books in the entire Old Testament. It's only 3 chapters, I think about 73 verses. But nevertheless, the message that Joel wants to convey is very, very important. Here's the story. Joel was written against the backdrop of a natural disaster. If we read through the book, we learn that a plague of locusts descended upon the people of Israel. Locusts showed up and devoured everything. The locusts ate up trees and shrubs and crops and vineyards and gardens. There was nothing green left. And as a result, the people of Israel faced some real hardship. Losing their crops meant that they were going to be hungry for a while. They would be running short of food before long. Well, Joel used that event to try to raise some important questions and also to reaffirm a very important truth. The first question that Joel raises for us is, how do we make sense of things that don't make sense? There are lots of stuff that happens in our world that we just don't have any control over. A tornado comes, a hurricane comes, or maybe there's a wildfire, an earthquake, a tidal wave. All of those are natural disasters, very much like a plague of locusts descending upon the land. And whenever any one of those events happen, our lives are upended, we suffer tremendous loss, we have questions about the future. But certainly one of the things that we ask in the midst of all that is, what does this mean? And if we're people of faith, we want to ask, where is God in this? Did God send the hurricane or the tornado? How did this happen? Why did this happen? And so when we read the book of Joel and we read about the plague of locusts, the God question comes front and center. How do we make sense of things that don't make sense? You and I are always in the business of trying to interpret our lives, to figure out what this event or this event means. We're always asking, how do we tie our lives together? And Joel raises that question for us indirectly. As well, whenever natural disasters or things beyond our control, whenever they happen, we're forced to ask ourselves an important question. What matters? What matters to us? So, for example, let's say that near in this area where we live, there's lots of trees and forests. Maybe somehow there's a wildfire that gets started and it begins to blaze out of control. And one day the police come to our door and they knock on our door and they tell us, you have to evacuate. You have to leave within an hour. And so in that hour, we're forced to say, okay, we've got to leave. What are we going to take with us? What matters? Obviously, we would take our pets. We'd maybe take some valuable papers that we might need down the road, some insurance policies. Maybe we would grab the photo album. We try to make sure that we had whatever money we had on hand. Maybe there's some other stuff that we grab. But whenever something like that happens, we're always asking ourselves, what matters? Well, Joel used the event of the plague of locusts to pose that same question to the people of Israel. He says, what matters to you? Have you failed God? Have you lost sight of God's place in your life? Is there something you've done that you need to change your mind about? Is there a new direction that you need to be taking? Against the backdrop of an event that no one could control, Joel said, what matters? What matters in your walk with God? Then there's this word of promise that the book of Joel offers. Perhaps the most famous verse in the entire book of Joel is this. God says, I will restore to you the years that the locusts have eaten. In other words, God was promising, locusts have come and devoured everything, but I want you to know I will work in such a way that in the next few years, your crops will be so abundant, you'll have more than enough. You'll have more than enough to make up for what you have lost and what you have suffered. That's God's way of saying that disaster, tragedy, heartache, and even death, those things don't have the final say in our lives. God is always working, yes, to invite us to come back to Him, but God is also working to make sure that our losses, the things that we have suffered, are not the last note in our lives. I will restore to you the years that the locusts have eaten. Whenever we've suffered great loss, whenever we have endured much suffering, the promise is that that's not the end, that there's more to come that is good from God's hand. Well, that'll do it for today. As always, if you have any questions, you know how to reach me. You can send me a text or an email, give me a phone call, reach out any way you want to. I'll be glad to talk to you anytime or anywhere. In the meantime, I hope that you continue to do well and enjoy your summer, and I pray God's very best blessings on you and your family. Again, thanks for joining me. Take care, and bye-bye.